know what the history of the Second Amendment is. They think that the Second Amendment was brought about back in the days when everybody had to go out and hunt to put food on their family's table. And that was the reason that it was put in the Constitution. Actually, that had very little, if anything, to do with it. The people in the cities back in the colonial days, and the days after the Revolution, they didn't hunt. They bought their food in open-air markets. The people in the rural areas did hunt. But that wasn't why the Second Amendment was put in the Constitution. The founders had just gone through a bloody and costly and lengthy war. The only way they were even able to start that war with the British was because everybody was armed. The only reason they won that war against the British was because everybody was armed. They had just gotten loose from one tyranny, and they were doing something totally unique. They were setting up a brand new form of government that had never been tried before. They had no idea if it was going to work. So the one thing that was put in there to protect everything else in the Constitution, including the other parts of the Bill of Rights, was the Second Amendment. That way, if a tyranny was formed, if a person, the President of the United States or the Congress or the courts or any group decided they were going to set themselves up as tyrants, the American people would be able to fight back and still be armed. These days, with crime the way it is, the Second Amendment takes on even added importance. So that's what it's all about. And now we've had assaults on the Second Amendment for a long time, and now it's an all-out assault. We have a President of the United States who essentially has set himself up as a de facto dictator and working on making a permanent arrangement for all of us to live with. He is violating the Constitution on a daily basis. Article 2 of the Constitution sets out the duties of the President. And basically, those duties are primarily to enforce the laws passed by Congress. Doesn't say anything about him choosing which laws he wants to enforce that have been passed by Congress. But he chooses not to enforce immigration laws. He chooses not to defend the Defense of Marriage Act. It certainly doesn't say that he can make his own laws. He does that all the time. These executive orders he's coming out with. Now, let me tell you about executive orders. The idea behind executive orders was that when Congress was in recess and something needed to be done on an emergency basis, the President could do it on his own, but when Congress came back out of recess and into session, they had to approve what he'd done. Obama just goes right along and does whatever he wants. He's basically giving himself the power to declare martial law for any reason whatsoever by executive order and to take control of the food supplies, transportation, health care. Of course, they've already taken that away from us. And energy supplies, everything. He's done that by executive order. He is also, on a daily basis, violating his oath of office. He took an oath very similar to the one that I took as a military officer. To protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I didn't raise my hand and say to protect and defend the President of the United States against all his enemies. I took an oath to the Constitution. He took the same oath. How many of you are aware that there's actually a statute with criminal penalties in it for violating that oath of office? Because a lot of you local officials took the same oath. There is, you can, if it is shown that you are deliberately trying to do something to damage the Constitution, you can be fined $10,000 and sent to prison for a year. That's a federal statute. He's doing it on a daily basis, violating his oath of office. They violated it with Obamacare. That was a destruction of the balance of powers, and that's something else that he's trying to do, is destroy the balance of powers. He ignores Congress. He ignores the courts. A friend of mine is a federal judge in New Orleans, and after the BP spill, Obama Secretary of Interior stopped giving out permits for exploration in the Gulf of Mexico. A couple of people who had these permits pre-approved went to court, and the judge, Martin Feldman, said, "You can't do this. It's not within your authority." Obama told him to ignore the judge, and he did. Still refused to give out permits. They went back to court. The judge ordered him again to give out the permits. Obama told him to ignore him again. The third time he went to court, the judge found him in contempt. But they're still ignoring the court order. They're still not doing what the court has told them to do. But on the Second Amendment, that's where the line in the sand has to be drawn. Now, at the U.S. Justice Foundation, we fight on everything involving the Constitution. I thought I was retired too. They dragged me kicking and screaming out of retirement to reactivate my law license, and now I'm in charge of all the attorneys around the country. We filed 2 briefs this week in the Supreme Court and 1 brief in the Court of Appeals. 2 briefs in the Supreme Court were on Proposition 8 in California and on the Defense of Marriage Act. The one in the Court of Appeals was on one of 4 cases we're involved in attacking the HHS mandate. So that's some of what we do. We're involved in all the constitutional issues. But Second Amendment, that's my area of expertise. I've been fighting for the Second Amendment in and out of court for over 38 years. And I have never seen it in danger the way it is now. We have the bills pending in Congress to outlaw assault weapons. You got a bunch of people up there going to vote on a bill, they have no clue what an assault weapon is. I don't know what an assault weapon is. I mean, it's something that they just came up with a term for weapons that are ugly. They don't like the look of them, so they call them assault weapons, and they figure everybody else is going along with banning the assault weapons. The way the definitions read, and you have to read this stuff. I was one of the few people, I'm told, in the country who read the original 1,100-page version of Obamacare. I had half a bottle of scotch while I was doing it. It was that hard to do. Then I turned around at the end of it, read all 2,700 pages of the final one. So you have to read these things, and our members of Congress don't do that, so they don't even know what they're voting on. So this assault weapon ban is so poorly worded, the definition of assault weapons, that they can outlaw anything that has military components or looks military or has the capacity to be used by the military. So if you got a 9mm Glock, of course I don't have one of those, I've never owned a weapon, but if you got a 9mm Glock, or I guess what I've got is a couple of assault weapons, that can be banned under this definition. Particularly if that Glock holds more than 10 rounds in the clip. And Glocks routinely hold 12 to 15 rounds, and you can get larger clips.
Magazine. Clips are for your hair, magazines are your
Correct.
Army guys.
Interesting thing about the magazine business, though, is that they're talking about banning these things. Those are very easy to make. You can basically make those in your home. So they're banning something that's useless. But then most gun control legislation is useless. It's been shown throughout the years. Then they've got the bill for the universal background checks. A lot of people are saying, well, why are you opposed to that? No big deal, they ought to check everybody's background. No, that's means registration. If any of you have bought a firearm through the federal registration system, the background check, if you think that they are really destroying the record of that firearm purchase, I got some property in Brooklyn I'll sell you, namely a bridge. They're keeping that, and now they want to get everybody who buys their weapons privately or who inherits their weapons or gets them from a family member, they want to put us all through background checks. So it's universal registration. That's why we have to oppose it. That's why I oppose it. But if you really want to know what's going on, you go to those 23 executive actions that Obama signed with one executive order. 23 executive actions. Remember the little kids gathered around him? Remarkable picture. Because I saw that and I thought, I've seen that picture before. I did. It's in the history of Nazi Germany, the book I got. Adolf Hitler with little kids gathered around him as he signed a weapons ban, saying this was to save the children. By the way, you know, the first thing Adolf Hitler did when he became Chancellor of Germany was take over, nationalize the healthcare system. He figured if he could control the healthcare, he could control the people, because he could control whether or not they got healthcare.